By the time Victoria realized she had traded something irreplaceable for something temporary, Daniel had already built a world she no longer belonged to. The apartment on West 23rd Street was not small, but it had begun to feel that way. Not because of the walls, because of the silence between them. Victoria stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting the neckline of her black dress for the third time. The fabric hugged her perfectly, tailored, expensive, new. Daniel noticed it immediately, not because of the price, but because he hadn't seen it before. "You bought something new," he said from the kitchen, his voice neutral. Victoria didn't turn around. "I needed something appropriate for tonight." Appropriate. The word lingered longer than it should have. Daniel leaned against the counter, watching her reflection instead of her. There was something precise in the way she moved lately. Controlled. Calculated, like she was performing a version of herself she hadn't fully rehearsed yet. "Corporate event?" he asked. "Yes, networking matters, Daniel." She finally met his eyes through the mirror. Not everything is about staying comfortable. There it was. Not an argument, not even criticism, just a quiet implication that comfort, his version of life, was no longer enough. Daniel nodded slowly. Of course. He didn't ask anything else. That was his pattern. Observe first, understand later. Victoria picked up her phone from the dresser. The screen lit up her face for a brief second, and Daniel caught it. That flicker of anticipation. Not for him, for something else. Someone else, maybe. Or just the world outside this apartment. She typed quickly, smiled faintly, then locked the screen. "Don't wait up," she said, slipping on her heels. "I won't." Another silence, thicker this time. When the door closed behind her, Daniel exhaled. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge something had shifted. He walked into the bedroom. The faint scent hit him before anything else. Not Victoria's usual perfume. Hers was softer, warmer. Something he had memorized over years without realizing it. This one was sharper, colder, lingering on the edge of unfamiliar. He stepped closer to the dresser. Her scarf was draped carelessly across the chair. He picked it up, almost absent-mindedly. The scent was stronger there. Daniel didn't react the way most people would. No immediate suspicion, no anger. Just a quiet note filed somewhere deep in his mind. Something doesn't match. He placed the scarf back exactly where it had been. Across the city, Victoria stepped into a different world. The rooftop venue overlooked Manhattan like a promise. Glass, steel, and golden light stretching into the night. Conversations floated in polished tones, laughter carefully measured, everything curated. This was what she had been seeing online for months. This was what she had started to believe she deserved. Victoria. She turned. Adrian Cole didn't approach people. People adjusted around him. Tailored suit, effortless posture, the kind of confidence that didn't need validation because it had already been paid for many times over. "You made it," he said, his tone smooth, assured. "Of course," she replied, matching his energy. "I wouldn't miss this." He studied her for a second. Not her face, but her presentation, as if assessing value. "You look like you belong here." It was a simple sentence, but it landed deeper than it should have. Because for the first time in a long time, Victoria felt it might be true. They walked together through the crowd, and with each step, the distance between her and her old life stretched just a little further. "You've been working in media strategy, right?" Adrian asked. "Yes. And you're still with your husband?" The question was casual. Too casual. Victoria hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she didn't know which version of the answer she wanted to give. "Yes," she said finally. Adrian nodded, as if the information had already been anticipated, filed away. "Stability has its place," he said, "but it rarely creates momentum." Momentum. Another word that lingered. Victoria glanced around. The dresses, the watches, the effortless displays of success. These people weren't waiting. They were moving. And suddenly, Daniel felt still. "I've always believed," Adrian continued, "that people either grow into the life they want or they settle into the one they have." It wasn't advice. It was positioning. Victoria felt something shift inside her. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to create a crack, a possibility. Back in the apartment, Daniel sat at his desk, laptop open but untouched. The code on the screen reflected in his eyes, but he wasn't reading it. He was thinking. Not about betrayal, not yet. About patterns. Victoria's tone, her timing, the new dress, the unfamiliar scent. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed something incomplete, but forming. Daniel didn't chase conclusions. He built them. Slowly. Precisely. He opened a new file on his laptop. Not code this time. A list. Not accusations, not assumptions. Just observations. Because whatever this was, distance, change, something else entirely, he wasn't going to react blindly. He was going to understand it, and then decide what it was worth. Across the city, Victoria laughed at something Adrian said, her hand briefly touching his arm. It wasn't accidental, and for the first time she didn't pull away. Not because she had to, but because somewhere deep inside she had already started telling herself, this isn't wrong. This is growth. The second time Victoria saw Adrian Cole, it didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt arranged. The invitation had arrived that morning. An exclusive networking brunch hosted at a private members club in Midtown. The kind of place that didn't advertise, didn't need to. Entry wasn't about money alone. It was about proximity to power. Victoria stood outside for a moment before walking in, adjusting her sunglasses though the sky was overcast. Her reflection in the glass door looked composed, elevated, closer to the version of herself she had been curating online for months. Inside, everything was quiet in a way that suggested control rather than absence. Soft conversations, crisp uniforms. No one raised their voice because no one needed to. She belonged here. Or at least, she was starting to believe she could. Victoria. She turned before she even registered the voice. Adrian stood near the bar, already watching her. Not surprised, not curious, just certain. "You came," he said, as if confirming an expectation rather than expressing pleasure. "You invited me," she replied, stepping closer. A faint smile touched his lips. "I invite a lot of people." The implication settled between them. "But you showed up." He gestured lightly toward the bartender. "You'll like this place. They understand discretion." Victoria sat beside him, crossing her legs with measured ease. Discretion sounds expensive. "It is," Adrian said. "That's why it works." The drink arrived without her ordering. Light, precise, perfectly chilled. She took a sip. "Good?" he asked. "It's intentional," she said, searching for the right word. Adrian nodded once, approving. Exactly. Everything about him operated like that. Intentional. Nothing wasted, nothing accidental. It was a stark contrast to Daniel, who believed in process, in patience, in building things from the ground up without needing to display them. For the first time, that difference didn't feel admirable. It felt limiting. They moved to a quieter section overlooking the street. From above, Manhattan looked less chaotic, more like a system, ordered, controlled, predictable. "Tell me something," Adrian said, leaning back slightly. "What do you actually want?" Victoria frowned faintly. "That's a broad question." "No," he said calmly. "It's a question people avoid, because the answer makes them uncomfortable." She looked away for a moment, watching a black car glide to a stop below. "I want—" She paused. "More." Adrian didn't react immediately. He let the word sit, expand. More what? Victoria exhaled slowly. "More than just getting by. More than waiting for things to happen. I don't want to look back in 10 years and realize I stayed in the same place because it was safe." "Safe," Adrian repeated, almost thoughtfully. "Safety is often just fear with better branding." She turned back to him. "And your husband?" he asked. There was no hesitation this time. "He's steady," she said. "Reliable." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "But?" Victoria didn't answer right away. Because the truth wasn't simple. It wasn't even entirely fair. Daniel had never failed her, never betrayed her, never made her feel small. But he also didn't make her feel elevated. "He's comfortable," she said finally. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. "Comfort," he said, "is where ambition goes to die." The sentence was quiet, controlled, but it landed with precision. Victoria felt it, not as an attack, but as a mirror, reflecting something she had already been thinking, quietly, guiltily. "I used to think that wasn't true," she admitted. "And now?" She hesitated, because answering honestly meant acknowledging something irreversible. "Now I'm not sure." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions. Adrian didn't introduce her as someone he'd just met. He positioned her. "This is Victoria Langford," he said to a venture capitalist with a firm handshake. "Sharp instincts, media strategy. She understands leverage." Victoria almost corrected him. She didn't, because for the first time, someone was speaking about her as if she were already more than she had proven herself to be. And people believed it. They nodded, listened, asked questions, not out of politeness, but out of interest. Adrian watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. He wasn't building connections. He was assigning value. Later, as the room thinned out, Adrian handed her a small, elegantly wrapped box. Victoria blinked. "What's this?" "A gesture," he said. "I can't accept that." "You can," he replied calmly. "The question is whether you will." She studied him. There was no pressure in his tone, no insistence, just certainty. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around the box. "This isn't necessary," she said, though her voice had softened. "Neither is potential," Adrian said. "Most people still waste it." Silence. Then, slowly, she opened it. Inside was a bracelet. Minimalist, gold, unmistakably expensive. The kind of piece that didn't shout wealth, but assumed it. Victoria's breath caught for a fraction of a second. "It's too much," she whispered. "No," Adrian said. "It's appropriate." Appropriate. The same word she had used days ago. But here, it meant something entirely different. That night, when Victoria returned home, the apartment felt smaller. Not physically, just in comparison. Daniel was sitting at the same desk, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across his face. He looked up when she entered, his expression calm, unreadable. "You're back early," he said. "It wasn't that long," she replied, slipping off her heels. Her movements were careful, not guilty, just aware. Daniel's eyes shifted briefly to her wrist. The bracelet. A detail. Small. Precise. He didn't comment on it. "Did it go well?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Then, after a pause, "Better than expected." Daniel nodded once. "I'm glad." And he meant it. That was the problem. In the bedroom, Victoria stood in front of the mirror again. The bracelet caught the light, subtle but undeniable. She lifted her wrist slightly, studying it. This isn't wrong. The thought came easier this time. It's just an opportunity. She exhaled slowly. Daniel doesn't understand this world. Another thought, stronger. He wouldn't even know what to do with it. And then, the one that mattered most. I'm not leaving him. I'm just not limiting myself anymore. In the other room, Daniel sat in silence. His laptop screen had gone dark, but his mind hadn't. The bracelet, the timing, the shift in her tone. Less defensive, more resolved. Not confusion, direction. He leaned back slightly, eyes unfocused as the pieces moved quietly into place. Not a conclusion yet, but closer. Much closer. Across the apartment, Victoria lay in bed, scrolling through her phone. Photos from the event were already circulating, filtered, polished, perfect. In one of them, she stood beside Adrian, both of them mid-conversation, both of them looking like they belonged in the same frame. She stared at it longer than she should have, and for the first time, the thought didn't feel like a question. It felt like a decision forming. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It arrived in fragments, quiet thoughts that repeated themselves often enough to feel like truth. On a gray Tuesday morning, Victoria sat at a cafe in Soho, her laptop open but untouched. A half-finished oat milk latte cooled beside her, forgotten. Her attention was fixed on her phone. Scroll. A former college friend posing in front of a villa in the south of France. Scroll. A lifestyle influencer unboxing a diamond watch, casually mentioning her fiancé's latest acquisition. Scroll. A woman Victoria vaguely knew, someone she once considered average, now stepping out of a chauffeured car, her caption reading, "Upgrade your life or stay where you are." Victoria paused. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark edge of the screen. Upgrade. The word didn't feel offensive anymore. It felt logical. "You're quiet today." Victoria looked up. Adrian slid into the seat across from her without asking. his presence as controlled and effortless as ever. He placed his phone face down on the table, an intentional gesture, signaling focus. "I'm thinking," she said. "About?" She hesitated. Then, surprisingly, she answered honestly. "About whether I've been underestimating myself." Adrian studied her, not interrupting. Victoria leaned back slightly, exhaling. "I've spent years being practical, responsible, building something stable." A faint, almost dismissive smile crossed her lips. "And now I'm starting to wonder if that was just another way of playing small." Adrian tilted his head. "What changed?" She glanced down at her phone again, then locked it. "I started noticing what other people have," she said. "Not just money, access, freedom, influence." "And you don't think you can have that?" "I think—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think I've been surrounded by someone who doesn't even want that." It was the first time she had said it out loud, not as frustration, as judgment. That night, Daniel cooked dinner. Something simple, familiar, the kind of meal that had once felt like comfort. Victoria sat across from him, barely touching her food. "You've been busy lately," Daniel said, his tone casual. "Work," she replied. "Of course." A pause. Then, "You've been going out more." Victoria looked up. "Is that a problem?" "No," Daniel said immediately. "Just different." "Different." She almost laughed. That word again. Safe, neutral, non-confrontational. "You know, Daniel," she said, setting her fork down, "not everything different is bad." "I didn't say it was." "But you implied it." "I observed it." There it was again, his way of speaking, careful, measured, never escalating. It used to make her feel secure. Now it felt like resistance. Later that night, Victoria stood in the bathroom, removing her makeup slowly, deliberately. Her reflection looked the same, but she didn't feel the same. "I've changed." The thought came with a strange sense of clarity, and then, almost immediately, "Or maybe I've just become more honest." She leaned closer to the mirror. "When was the last time I felt excited to come home?" The answer came too quickly, too easily. "I don't remember." Her chest tightened. Not with guilt, but with something else. Justification. The next time she saw Adrian, it wasn't at an event. It was intentional. A private dinner. Quiet. Exclusive. The restaurant didn't have a sign outside, just a door, a host who recognized Adrian immediately, and a table already waiting. Victoria arrived 5 minutes early. Adrian was already there. Of course he was. "You're punctual," he said as she sat down. "I value time." "So do I." Their eyes met for a second longer than necessary. Dinner unfolded with effortless precision. The wine was selected for her, the menu adjusted without her asking. Every detail anticipated. Victoria felt it again, that subtle but powerful sensation. Not just being seen, being managed. And instead of resisting it, she found herself relaxing into it. "You're different tonight," Adrian said. "How?" "Less conflicted." Victoria smiled faintly. "Maybe I've just stopped asking questions I already know the answers to." Adrian didn't respond immediately. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a slim envelope, placing it on the table between them. Victoria's eyes flickered down. "What is that?" "An opportunity," he said. She didn't touch it. "Explain." A media consulting role, Adrian said. Flexible. High-level clients. It would put you in rooms you're not currently in. And why are you offering this to me? Because you're capable, he said simply. Then, after a brief pause, and because I invest in people who understand value. Value. The word settled deep. Victoria's fingers moved, slowly, almost cautiously, toward the envelope. She stopped just short of touching it. This changes things, she said quietly. Yes, Adrian replied. It does. On the walk home, the city felt different, sharper, louder, full of possibility. Victoria's heels clicked against the pavement in a steady rhythm, her mind racing ahead of her steps. This isn't betrayal, the thought came immediately. It's growth. She tightened her grip on her bag. Daniel and we've been drifting for a while. Another thought, smoother this time. This just makes it real. She stopped at a crosswalk, staring at the red light. I'm not taking something away from him. I'm choosing something for myself. The light turned green. She didn't hesitate. When she opened the apartment door, Daniel was awake, sitting in the dark. No laptop this time, just silence. You're late, he said. I told you I had dinner. With who? The question was direct. No softness, no deflection. Victoria felt a flicker of irritation. A colleague. Daniel held her gaze. Not accusing, just waiting. For a moment, she considered telling the truth, not because she felt guilty, but because she was tired of explaining herself. Instead, she exhaled. You wouldn't know him. A small sentence, but it carried distance, finality. Daniel nodded once. Okay, that was all. No argument, no interrogation, just acceptance. And somehow, that made it worse. Later, as Victoria lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts replayed the evening. The restaurant. The envelope. Adrian's voice. You're capable. No one had said it like that before. Not Daniel. Not anyone. Her chest rose slowly with each breath. This is who I'm supposed to become. The idea felt less like a question now, more like a direction. And for the first time, the boundary she had once respected without thinking felt negotiable. In the living room, Daniel sat alone. The apartment was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't just distance. It was clarity forming, not emotional, structural. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, eyes focused on nothing in particular. Patterns, timing, language. You wouldn't know him. Daniel repeated the sentence in his mind. Not defensive, not accidental, intentional distance. He exhaled slowly, then reached for his phone. Not to check, not to confront. To begin, because whatever Victoria believed she was stepping into, Daniel had already started building something far beyond it. And when it was finished, he wouldn't need answers. The decision didn't arrive in a moment of weakness. It arrived in silence. 3 weeks after the dinner, Victoria stood in Adrian's penthouse overlooking Central Park. The view was impossible to ignore. Glass walls stretching from floor to ceiling, the city laid out like something owned rather than inhabited. The late afternoon light turned everything gold, including her reflection. She didn't touch anything at first. Not the marble counter, not the crystal glass waiting beside a bottle she couldn't pronounce. She simply stood there, taking it in. This is what it looks like. Not imagined, not filtered. Real. You're very still, Adrian said from behind her. Victoria turned slowly. I'm adjusting. To what? She hesitated, then allowed herself to be honest. To the fact that this exists. Adrian smiled faintly, stepping closer. Most people know it exists. Very few ever get close enough to feel it. And the ones who do? They don't go back. The sentence wasn't threatening. It was observational. That made it more powerful. They moved through the apartment as if it had already accepted her presence. Adrian didn't give her a tour. He didn't need to. Everything spoke for itself. The art, the silence, the absence of anything unnecessary. Control, expressed through space. You're quiet again, Adrian noted. Victoria leaned lightly against the edge of the kitchen island. I'm thinking about how different this is. From your life with Daniel? The name landed differently here. Smaller. Yes, she said. From everything I've known. Adrian studied her carefully. Different doesn't always mean better. Victoria met his gaze. No, she said. But sometimes it does. They sat down eventually. Wine poured, untouched. The conversation shifted, not abruptly, but with intention. Adrian spoke less, listened more, guided without appearing to. You've been doing well with the consulting work, he said. It's not difficult, Victoria replied. It's just access. Access is everything. She nodded slowly, because she was starting to understand that. Opportunities weren't earned equally. They were granted. And Adrian granted them. You know why I chose you? He asked suddenly. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. I assumed it was my skill. Adrian smiled, just enough to acknowledge the answer. That's part of it, he said. But skill is common. Discipline is common. He paused. What's rare is someone who's willing to see their own life objectively and admit when it's not enough. Victoria didn't respond, because the words echoed something she had already been telling herself, over and over. This isn't enough. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, just full. Victoria felt it building, not tension, but inevitability. Her phone buzzed lightly on the counter. She glanced at it. Daniel. A simple message. Did you get home safe? 3 words. Familiar. Predictable. Steady. Victoria stared at the screen longer than necessary, then turned it face down. Not now. The thought came easily. Too easily, Adrian noticed. Of course he did. You don't have to answer that, he said. I know. But it's interesting that you chose not to. Victoria exhaled slowly. I'm allowed to have space. Of course you are, Adrian replied calmly. The question is, what are you creating with that space? The words settled deep, not accusatory, directional. Victoria stepped away from the counter, walking toward the window again. The city stretched endlessly in front of her. So many lives, so many choices. She could feel it now, the exact moment she had been approaching for weeks. Not confusion, not hesitation. A line. And the awareness that crossing it would change everything. This doesn't have to be complicated, Adrian said behind her. Victoria didn't turn. No, she agreed quietly. It doesn't. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, composed, certain, different. "I've been thinking about it," she continued, "about what I want, about what my life could look like if I stopped limiting it." Adrian said nothing. He didn't need to. Victoria closed her eyes for a brief second. Daniel's face flickered through her mind. Not vividly, not emotionally, just present, steady, safe. And then, just as quickly, distant. "This isn't working anymore," she said, almost to herself. Adrian's voice remained calm. "What isn't?" "My marriage." The word felt heavier than she expected, but not enough to stop. "We've been drifting for a long time," she continued. "We just haven't said it out loud." "That happens," Adrian said. "People outgrow each other." Outgrow. The word fit perfectly. Better than betrayal. Better than guilt. Victoria turned slowly to face him. "I'm not making a mistake," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement she needed to hear out loud. Adrian held her gaze. "No," he said. "You're making a decision," and that was enough. Not reassurance, not emotion, just validation. Victoria stepped closer, not impulsively, not hesitantly, deliberately. Every movement measured, every second accounted for. She wasn't being pulled. She was choosing. When their distance disappeared, there was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet shift in gravity. Something final, something irreversible. Later, the city lights had replaced the sunset. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the outline of the bracelet on her wrist. It felt different now, heavier, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Adrian moved behind her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. Not affectionate, not possessive, just present. "You'll stay tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. Victoria didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her phone again. Another message from Daniel. "Everything okay?" She stared at it. "This is already done." The thought came with unsettling clarity. This isn't the moment it happens. It already happened. When I decided. She locked the screen. "Yes," she said softly. "I'll stay." The next morning, the apartment felt even quieter. Not peaceful. Controlled. Victoria stood in the bathroom, brushing her hair, watching herself carefully. There was no visible difference, no mark, no sign. And yet, everything had changed. On the kitchen counter, a small box waited. She opened it. A new watch. Elegant, minimal, expensive. Inside, a simple note. "For your time." Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around it. Not excitement this time. Something else. Recognition. This is how it works. Not gifts. Positioning. Not affection. Investment. Behind her, Adrian adjusted his cufflinks. "You have a meeting at 11, he said. "Car will be downstairs in 20 minutes. Victoria turned. "You scheduled it?" "I arranged it," he corrected. "You'll do well." Another step. Another layer. She nodded slowly, because part of her didn't resist. It made things easier, clearer, directed. When she finally returned to the apartment she shared with Daniel, the air felt different. Not tense, just unfamiliar. Daniel was there. Of course he was. Sitting in the same place, observing, always observing. "You didn't come home," he said. Direct, no softness. Victoria placed her bag down carefully. "I needed space." Daniel's eyes moved briefly to the watch, then back to her face. "How much space?" The question landed clean, precise. Victoria met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't soften. "I don't know yet," she said. Silence. Not empty. Final. Daniel nodded once. Not in acceptance, in understanding, a piece of the structure locking into place. Victoria turned away, walking toward the bedroom. Her steps didn't falter, because in her mind, this wasn't destruction. It was transition, upgrade, movement, forward. Behind her, Daniel remained still. No anger, no reaction, just clarity sharpening into something far more dangerous than emotion. Because while Victoria believed she had just stepped into a better life, she hadn't yet realized she had also stepped into something she no longer controlled. Daniel stopped asking questions, not because he didn't want answers, but because he already understood where answers would lead, and more importantly, what they would cost. The apartment had become a place of patterns. Victoria came and went without explanation now, no longer offering the small justifications she used to. Her schedule had gaps that didn't align, meetings that extended without detail, nights that blurred in the silence. And yet, Daniel never confronted her. He watched. Because confrontation would end the uncertainty, and uncertainty was still useful. It was a Thursday evening when the detail returned. Small, familiar, decisive. Victoria had just stepped out of the shower, the sound of water still echoing faintly through the apartment. Steam lingered in the hallway, softening the edges of everything. Daniel stood near the bedroom door, not intentionally waiting, just present. She walked past him, towel wrapped around her hair, another around her body. Fresh, clean, but not entirely. There it was again. That scent. Not her perfume, not anything that belonged to their life. It was faint, barely there beneath the soap and heat, but unmistakable. Cold, sharp, precise, consistent. Daniel didn't react, didn't even look at her directly. He simply noted it. Again. Later that night, Victoria fell asleep quickly, her breathing steady, even, unbothered. Daniel lay beside her, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The city hummed outside, distant but constant. His mind moved through everything, not emotionally, not chaotically, structurally. Timeline, behavioral shifts, language, objects. The bracelet, the watch, the scent. Each piece alone meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern too consistent to ignore. He didn't need confirmation. He needed strategy. The next morning, Daniel woke before her, as usual. Routine hadn't changed. That was the point. He moved quietly through the apartment, making coffee, opening his laptop at the kitchen counter. But today, he didn't open code. He opened a different file, a projection model, numbers, growth curves, market expansion scenarios. The idea had been sitting in the background for years, a software infrastructure platform designed for scalable data optimization. Complex, high risk, high reward. Daniel had never rushed it, because until now, he hadn't needed to. Now, he did. Across the room, Victoria stirred awake. She walked into the kitchen slowly, her hair loose, her movements softer than usual. "Morning," she said. Daniel looked up briefly. "Morning." No tension, no questions, just normal. Victoria poured herself coffee, leaning against the counter. "You've been working a lot," she said. "So have you." A pause, then, "Different kind of work." Victoria's lips tightened slightly. Not defensive, just aware. Daniel closed his laptop. "I'm going to start something," he said. She glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "A company." The word hung in the air. Victoria blinked. "You already have a job." "This isn't about a job." Another pause. Then, calmly, "It's about scale." Victoria studied him for a moment. This wasn't the Daniel she was used to. Not entirely. There was something quieter now, more focused, less available. "That's risky," she said. "Yes." "And you're okay with that?" Daniel held her gaze. "I think staying the same is riskier." The sentence landed differently than he intended, or maybe exactly as he intended. Victoria looked away first, because for a brief second, she felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not regret, but dissonance. Later that day, Daniel met with someone he hadn't spoken to in months. Marcus Reed, former colleague, now venture partner at a mid-sized investment firm. They sat in a glass-walled office overlooking downtown, the city stretched out beneath them like a map waiting to be redrawn. "You've been quiet," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "I've been preparing." "For this?" Marcus gestured to the folder Daniel had placed on the table. Daniel nodded once. Marcus opened it, scanning the contents. His expression shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. "This isn't small," he said. "No, this is aggressive." Daniel didn't react to the word. He simply said, "It's necessary." Marcus looked up. "You've been sitting on this?" "For a while." "And now you want to move?" "Yes." "Why now?" Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the real reason wasn't something he would say out loud. Not here. Not like this. Instead, he said, "Timing." Marcus studied him for a second longer than necessary, then nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's talk numbers." Back in the apartment that night, Victoria stood in front of the mirror again. But this time, she wasn't adjusting her appearance. She was watching herself, carefully, analyzing something she couldn't quite name. Daniel's words echoed faintly in her mind. "It's about scale." It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Because for the first time in weeks, he sounded like someone who belonged in the same world she was stepping into. She shook the thought away. No, it's too late for that. The decision had already been made. The line had already been crossed. You can't go backward. In the living room, Daniel sat with his laptop open again. Numbers moving, connections forming, momentum building. Not visibly, not yet, but structurally. I don't need to stop this. The thought was calm, clear. I need to outgrow it. Victoria walked past him without speaking. Daniel didn't look up, didn't follow her, didn't react. Because he wasn't watching her anymore. Not in the way she thought. He was watching everything else. The market, the timing, the opportunities she couldn't see, and the one thing that mattered most. The exact moment when silence would no longer be passive, but decisive. That night, as Victoria slept, Her phone lit up briefly on the nightstand. A message. Adrian. Tomorrow. Same place. No name, no explanation, just expectation. Daniel's eyes opened in the dark. Not fully, just enough. He didn't reach for the phone. Didn't need to, because by now, he wasn't looking for proof. He was building an answer. Power doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It accumulates quietly, in rooms where decisions are made without witnesses, in conversations that never need to be repeated, in signatures that reshape futures without raising voices. 3 months later, Daniel stopped working from the apartment. Not abruptly, gradually. First, longer hours, then fewer explanations. Eventually, absence that felt intentional. Victoria noticed. Of course she did. But by then, she had already learned how to reinterpret absence. He's busy. He's focused. He's doing his thing. And more importantly, it's not my concern anymore. The office Daniel moved into wasn't impressive from the outside. A converted industrial space in Flatiron. Minimal signage, no unnecessary design. Inside, everything was different. Screens lined the walls. Data streamed in quiet, constant motion. Conversations were low, precise, efficient. No one wasted words. No one needed to. Marcus stood near the center of the room, watching as Daniel walked in. "You're late," Marcus said. "By 3 minutes." Marcus smirked slightly. Investors don't measure time the way engineers do. Daniel set his bag down. Investors measure outcomes. A pause. Then Marcus nodded once. "Good, because you're about to give them one." The meeting room was glass, but not transparent in the way most people understood. From the outside, it looked open. From the inside, it felt controlled. 3 investors sat waiting, not curious, evaluating. Daniel didn't introduce himself with enthusiasm. He didn't pitch. He presented. Calmly, structurally, without urgency. Because urgency implied need, and Daniel didn't need them. He needed alignment. "This isn't a startup," one of them said halfway through. "This is infrastructure." "Yes," Daniel replied. "That takes time." "Yes, that takes capital." Daniel held his gaze. "Yes." The investor leaned back slightly. "And what makes you think you'll survive long enough to build it?" Silence. Not hesitation. Calculation. Daniel didn't rush the answer. Because the answer wasn't in the words. It was in the timing. "I'm not building for survival," he said finally. "I'm building for inevitability." The room shifted, subtly, but permanently. Across the city, Victoria adjusted the cuff of her blazer as she stepped out of a black car. Not her car, Adrian's. It had become routine now. Not discussed, not questioned, just expected. The building she entered was unfamiliar at first. Now, it wasn't. Private offices, controlled access, people who recognized Adrian before he spoke. Victoria walked beside him, matching his pace without thinking. "You'll handle the meeting," Adrian said. She glanced at him. "I thought you were leading." "I am," he replied, "but they need to see you." "Why?" "Because you're part of the structure now." The words should have felt empowering, and at first they did. Inside the conference room, Victoria spoke with precision, confident, controlled, elevated, everything Adrian had positioned her to be. The clients responded exactly as expected. Interest, respect, agreement. But halfway through, Victoria realized something. She wasn't leading. She was executing. Every answer she gave had already been shaped, every decision already aligned, every movement already anticipated. And Adrian barely spoke. After the meeting, as they walked back toward the car, Victoria broke the silence. You knew exactly how that would go. Adrian didn't look at her. Of course. And me? What about you? Victoria slowed slightly. Did I have a choice in any of it? Adrian stopped, turned, looked at her directly. Not cold, not warm, just certain. You always have a choice, he said. The question is whether you understand the value of the options. Victoria held his gaze. Something flickered, brief, uncomfortable. Then she nodded. Of course, because stepping back now was no longer an option she believed in. That night, the apartment felt different again. But this time, it wasn't because of distance. It was because of contrast. Daniel was already there when she arrived. Not working, not distracted. Waiting. You're home earlier, he said. Victoria placed her bag down slowly. So are you. A small pause. Then Daniel stood, not abruptly, not aggressively, just present. I closed around today, he said. Victoria blinked. What? Funding. The word landed heavier than expected. How much? Daniel didn't hesitate. 8 figures. Silence. Not disbelief. Not excitement. Something else. Victoria studied him carefully, because for the first time, she couldn't immediately place him. That's... She started, then stopped. Significant? Daniel offered. Yes. He nodded once. It is. Another pause. Then Victoria asked the question she hadn't planned to ask. Since when? Daniel held her gaze. Since before you started staying out at night. The sentence was calm, measured, precise. Victoria's chest tightened. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. You didn't tell me, she said. No, Daniel replied. I didn't. Why? A brief silence. Then, because you weren't asking. The words didn't sound like an accusation, but they landed like one. Victoria looked away first, because something inside her shifted, not dramatically, but enough to register. I didn't know, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. That's the point. Across the room, the space between them felt sharper now, defined, no longer vague. Victoria crossed her arms slightly, defensive, without meaning to. So what happens now? She asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the answer was already in motion. I keep building, he said finally. And me? For the first time in weeks. Daniel paused. Not to think. To decide how much truth to reveal. Then, you already chose your direction. Silence. Not loud, not explosive, but final in a way that neither of them could undo. Victoria stood there, unmoving, because for the first time, she felt it. Not guilt, not regret, loss of control, not over Daniel, but over the narrative she had built in her mind. Because somewhere, without her noticing, the balance had shifted, and the version of Daniel she had dismissed as safe was no longer standing still. He was moving, faster than she expected, further than she could see. And for the first time, Victoria wasn't sure she was ahead anymore. That night, she lay awake longer than usual, her phone in her hand. Adrian's name on the screen. A message waiting. She didn't open it right away, because a thought, small, quiet, dangerous, slipped in where certainty used to be. What if this isn't what I thought it was? Across the apartment, Daniel closed his laptop. The numbers were no longer projections. They were real. Momentum had begun, and when it reached its peak, he wouldn't need to confront her, because the answer she chose was already building its own consequences. The invitation arrived on a Monday morning, minimalist, white, unbranded, except for a single name embossed in restrained black lettering: Hayes Infrastructure Group, Private Launch Event. Victoria stared at it longer than necessary, not because she didn't understand what it was, but because she did. "Are you going?" Adrian asked later that afternoon, his tone casual in a way that suggested he already knew the answer. Victoria sat across from him, the invitation placed neatly on the table between them. "I wasn't planning to," she said. Adrian picked it up, scanning it briefly before setting it back down. "You should," he said. "Why?" A faint pause, then calmly, "Because people are going to be there." People. Not Daniel, not the company. People. Victoria exhaled slowly. "You knew about this?" she asked. "I know about most things that matter," Adrian replied. The confidence was intact, but something beneath it wasn't as solid as before. That evening, Victoria stood in front of the mirror again. But this time, there was no excitement, no anticipation, only calculation. The dress she chose wasn't new. It wasn't loud. It was precise. Because tonight wasn't about being seen. It was about understanding where she stood. The venue was not what Victoria expected. Not extravagant, not performative. It was a repurposed industrial space in Lower Manhattan. Clean, expansive, intentionally understated. No excess, only structure, only control. Inside, the atmosphere was different from Adrian's world. Less polished, more real. Conversations were sharper, less decorative, more consequential. These weren't people displaying wealth. They were people creating it. Victoria stepped in beside Adrian, her posture instinctively aligning with his presence. But something was off, subtle, difficult to name. People greeted Adrian. Of course they did. But the tone was different. Still respectful, but measured, evaluating. And then Victoria noticed something else. They weren't looking at Adrian for long. Their attention shifted, past him, to Daniel. He stood across the room, speaking with a group of investors. No raised voice, no grand gestures, just presence. Calm, controlled, certain. Victoria's breath caught. Not visibly, but enough for her to feel it. Because for the first time, she wasn't seeing Daniel through memory or comparison. She was seeing him through context, and the context had changed. "He's positioned well," Adrian said beside her, his tone neutral. Victoria didn't look at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," Adrian replied, "he's not where he was." Across the room, Daniel's eyes lifted briefly, not searching, not reacting, just noticing. They landed on Victoria for less than a second, then moved on. No hesitation, no recognition, no claim. And that was worse than anger. The event began without announcement. No stage lights, no dramatic introductions, just a quiet shift in attention. Daniel stepped forward. The room adjusted. Not because they were told to, because they chose to. "I won't take much of your time," he said. His voice was even, measured, unaffected. "This isn't a presentation," he continued. "It's a confirmation." A screen behind him lit up. Not with branding, with data. Growth curves, acquisition structures, market penetration. Victoria didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. This wasn't a startup anymore. This was infrastructure, and it was already moving. Daniel didn't look at her. Not once. He didn't need to. Over the last quarter, he said, we've secured strategic partnerships across 3 sectors: logistics, finance, data security. Names appeared on the screen. Companies Victoria recognized. Companies Adrian had once referenced. And then one name appeared that changed everything. A firm Adrian had been negotiating with for months. Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. Victoria turned, slowly, to look at him for the first time since she had known him. Adrian didn't move. His jaw tightened slightly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. He moved faster, Adrian said quietly. Not to her, to himself. On the screen, the details continued. Equity shifts, control stakes, access points. Daniel wasn't just entering the space. He was restructuring it, and in doing so, he had removed something critical. Adrian's leverage. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded, layer by layer. The meetings, the delays, the subtle changes in tone. Victoria felt it connect, all at once. This wasn't coincidence. This was design. Daniel stepped away from the screen. No applause, no demand for recognition, because he didn't need it. The room had already decided. Conversations shifted instantly. Not toward Adrian, toward Daniel. Investors moved. Introductions changed. Energy redirected. Power, real power, doesn't argue, it reallocates. Victoria stood still in the middle of it, because for the first time, she wasn't part of the movement. She was outside of it. Adrian turned slightly, adjusting his cuff, composure returning. But thinner now. We should go, he said. Victoria didn't move. Wait, she said. Not loud, but enough, because something inside her was breaking. Not emotionally, structurally. The version of reality she had built was collapsing. You told me he was stable, she said quietly. Adrian didn't look at her. I said he was predictable. Victoria's chest tightened. He's not, she whispered. No, Adrian replied. A pause, then colder. He's not. Across the room, Daniel stood, surrounded now. Not overwhelmed, not elevated, aligned, exactly where he intended to be. Victoria took a step forward, then another. Not toward Adrian, toward Daniel. But before she could reach him, someone else did. Then another, then another. The space filled, closed. Access denied, not intentionally, naturally, because that's how power works. It doesn't exclude. It simply moves and leaves others behind. Victoria stopped, standing just outside the circle, watching, realizing, too late, because everything she had believed about value, about upgrade, about direction, had just been replaced. Not by words, but by reality. And in that moment, there was no confrontation, no accusation, just a truth so clear it didn't need to be spoken. She hadn't upgraded. She had miscalculated severely. And now, there was nothing left to reinterpret, only consequences. The silence came first, not the kind that comforts, not the kind that heals, the kind that settles after everything has already been decided. 3 days after the event, Adrian stopped answering. No explanation, no conflict, no closure, just absence. Victoria noticed it immediately. At first, she told herself it was temporary. He's busy. He's recalibrating. He'll reach out. By the second day, the messages changed. Shorter, sharper. We need to talk. Call me when you see this. Adrian? By the third, There was nothing left to send. Victoria stood alone in the apartment that no longer felt like hers. Adrian's penthouse hadn't welcomed her back. Not directly, not explicitly. But the signal was clear. No access code updates, no driver waiting, no invitations. The structure had removed her. Cleanly, efficiently. She walked to the window, staring out at the city that once felt full of promise. Now, it felt distant, indifferent. This wasn't supposed to happen. The thought came, fragile and late. She had followed the logic, the progression, the upgrade. So why did it feel like loss? Her phone buzzed. For a second, just a second, her chest lifted. Hope. Unknown number. A short message. The position is no longer available. We've decided to move in a different direction. Victoria stared at it. No name. No explanation. She didn't need one. Because now, everything was aligning, not in her favor, against her. That evening, she returned to the apartment on West 23rd Street. Not because she belonged there, but because it was the only place left. The door opened easily. Of course it did. Daniel had never changed the lock. Inside, nothing had moved, nothing had changed, except him. He stood near the window, his back to her, phone in hand, calm, still. Victoria closed the door quietly. For a moment, she said nothing, because words felt inadequate now. I didn't think it would end like this. Daniel didn't turn. Most things don't. His voice was the same, even, measured. But there was something missing. Emotion. Victoria took a step forward, then another. I need to talk to you, she said. Daniel lowered his phone slowly, turned, looked at her. Not with anger, not with pain, with distance. And that was harder to face than anything else. You can, he said. No resistance. No invitation, just permission. Victoria swallowed. Her throat felt dry. I made a mistake. The words sounded smaller out loud, weaker. Daniel didn't react, didn't interrupt. So she continued. I thought... She hesitated. I thought I was choosing something better. A pause. Then, more quietly, I thought I deserved more. Daniel nodded once. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. I know, he said. The simplicity of it broke something. Victoria's composure slipped, just slightly. He left, she said. The words came faster now, less controlled. He didn't even explain. Everything just disappeared. Daniel watched her, silent. I lost the clients, the position, everything I thought I was building. Her voice tightened. It wasn't real. Another pause. Then, I didn't see it. Finally, Daniel spoke. You saw it, he said. You just chose the version that benefited you. The words landed clean. No cruelty, no force, just truth. Victoria flinched. Not physically, internally. I thought we were already over, she said, quieter now. I thought we had already lost what mattered. Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying her. And that made it easier? He asked. Victoria didn't answer. Because the answer was yes. Silence filled the space between them again. But this time, it wasn't neutral. It was final. Victoria stepped closer. Desperation. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. I can fix this, she said. We can fix this. For the first time. Daniel's expression shifted, not toward anger, toward clarity. No, he said. The word was quiet, but absolute. Victoria froze. I've already moved past it, he continued. Not emotionally, structurally. She shook her head slightly. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to, Daniel replied. It just has to be true. Another step closer. Now she was within reach. I chose wrong. she said. Daniel held her gaze. Yes, he said. No hesitation. No comfort. Just acknowledgement. Victoria's breath caught. But I'm here now, she added quickly. That has to mean something. Daniel didn't move. Didn't soften. It means you lost control, he said. The sentence was precise. Final. And then, the one that ended everything. You didn't come back because you value me, Daniel said. You came back because no one else does. Silence. Not empty. Devastating. Victoria's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not yet, because something deeper had already broken. I was building something while you were leaving, Daniel continued. Not to compete with you, not to prove anything. A pause. Just to move forward. He stepped past her, calm, unhurried, and now I'm somewhere you can't follow. Victoria turned slowly, her voice barely held together. So that's it? Daniel stopped near the door. Didn't look back. That was it, he said. Not cold. Not harsh. Certain. He opened the door and left. Weeks later, Victoria sat alone in a smaller apartment across the city. No view, no silence. Just space. Her phone lay on the table. Inactive. Unwanted. She had tried to reach Adrian again. Nothing. She had thought about Daniel. More times than she could count. Not the version she left. The one he became. And for the first time, she understood something with painful clarity. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the lifestyle. It wasn't the access. It was the man. She had underestimated, and now there was no version of reality where she could correct it. Across the city, Daniel stood in a glass office overlooking everything he had built. Not loud, not excessive, precise, controlled, unreachable. His phone buzzed once. Unknown number. He glanced at it, didn't open it, didn't need to, because whatever it was, it no longer mattered. He set the phone down, turned back to the window, and continued forward without looking back.